knowing that those debts were unsustainable. And we have a situation ourselves in Ireland where Anglo-Irish Bank and other banks had lended aggressively in the Irish property market. And again, they've used money that has come from banks on the European continent. Bank for International Settlement figures show that Ireland owes UK banks 113 billion. German banks are owed 92 billion, French banks are owed 32 billion, Spanish banks are owed 9 billion, and the list goes on. The solution which the ECB is suggesting is a 440 billion loan facility, in which the ECB is going to use some of this money either to buy government bonds. For example, they spent between 4.5 and 9 billion recently on buying Italian and Spanish bonds, which resulted in the market lowering the interest rate for these countries to buy money at 5 and 10-year rates from 6% to just 5%. We don't know whether the economics and the financials behind these figures are in fact sustainable or not. The other option, of course, is to bail out countries. So, for example, Greece a year ago received a bailout of 110 billion, and just over a year later received a similar amount again. In terms of where the EU is going in this, there was obviously the policy in Ireland from the ECB and Jean-Claude Trichet was that no bank could fail, no Irish bank could fail, which is why the Irish taxpayer was given the job of basically funding the bad debts of Anglo-Irish banks so that money could be paid back to those bondholders and other private financial investors attached to the European banks on the continent. And yet we do have some politicians or former politicians who are willing to discuss some of the issues. John Bruton had argued that under the Lisbon Treaty, Article 127, or at least the Lisbon Treaty that amended the Treaty on the European Union, that the ECB has a prudential supervision of credit institutions power that had failed to be used. But the next step, of course, is a new treaty coming down the line in 2013. But I wonder what this treaty will do in order to tackle or to prohibit the fact that banks have lended recklessly, which has resulted in this problem in the first place. I remember in March 2010, Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy floated a proposal to try to get a ban on naked credit default swaps, so to try to stop private financial institutions from making bets on countries like Greece and Ireland on defaulting on their sovereign debt. Alone, if you look at figures again from the DTCC, 40 billion in 2008 was wagered against Italian and Spanish debt. The betting effectively 17 billion, with the making a bet effectively that the Italian government would default on its sovereign debt, and 23 billion was wagered that the Spanish government would default on sovereign debt. And there's no doubt in my mind that these are derivatives types products of which there's 33.9 trillion US dollars being spent in the markets. This is definitely a facet in relation to moving markets. So where are we to go with this? Well, currently we have a recent decision from the from the German Constitutional Court, which did give itself some limited powers in some ways to take on the European Court of Justice role to oversee whether the governments in fact are overstepping their powers in agreeing to, for example, in the latest case, agreeing to the Greek bailout, and whether the ECB and the EU, the European Commission, is actually overstepping its powers under the Lisbon Treaty, because there is a no bailout clause in which member states cannot take on the liabilities of other member states, which is effectively what has happened when you've decided to set up a fund to buy the bonds of other governments in order to save the euro. So we're at a situation where our politicians are fairly silent on it, the media are following the mainstream discourse on it, and there's an awful lot of, there's a lack of information on the subject. So it's my great pleasure today, therefore, to welcome Anthony Coughlin, who is the Secretary for the National Platform EU Research and Information Centre, and Fabio De Masi, who's a consultant to the Chief Economist of Die Linke in the German Bundestag, Michael Schlecht. And those two informed speakers, I'm sure, will have a lot to contribute today on our topic, Ireland and the Eurozone crisis. Please welcome them.